Well, let us now approach the reading and exposition of God's Word with a prayer. Lord, you opened the meaning of the Scriptures to the disciples on the road to Emmaus and set their hearts ablaze. By the power of your Spirit, kindle our hearts as we hear your word proclaimed, that we may receive you with joy. Amen. Our story today is a continuation of what we began on Thursday with the midweek meditation. It's the story of the disciples on the road to Emmaus. And as you might recall, we divided it into two parts, actually, a drama in two acts. And the first act we explored on Thursday, where the disciples are walking along on Easter Day, and they're perplexed because their good friend Jesus died. That was bad enough. But now there are reports that the tomb is empty, and they just don't know what to make of it. And so the stranger, who is Jesus, they don't recognize him, but it's Jesus, explains that, well, this was necessary. It's part of the story of faith. The Old Testament actually had embedded in it this whole story. And so he illustrates for them how the scriptures actually said that this is how God would come to us, with a one who would be raised up as a Messiah, and that Messiah would suffer and die and be raised from the dead. Well, now we begin Act 2, because now the disciples have come to the house where they were going to stay in Emmaus. Well, let's see what happens. This is Luke 24, verses 28 to 35. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening and the day is nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished out of their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. And they were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road, and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. Here ends our reading. May God grant us understanding. I've entitled my remarks today with one word: trending. Trending. Chances are you've heard the word. It's a buzzword for internet. It's where some content, a news story, or a tweet, or a video, or something else catches on, where it's demonstrated to be gaining momentum because more people are viewing it, and they view it, they share it, and in the sharing more people view it, and so they call that trending. And the reason it can be done is because metrics, the ability to measure these things, is built right in to the internet. I mean, that's how it works. In fact, these videos that I share with you, I can go to the YouTube channel where they're stored, and I can see how many people have actually viewed the videos. So I can see how they are trending. And I must say, it's very gratifying to see how many of you really are looking at these videos. It means you're interested, and that reinforces me. That makes me feel encouraged to stay at this and to share more of what I can do. And plus, your emails are very helpful. The feedback you give is very constructive, so thank you. Well, anyhow, that's what trending is about. It's a good word for the internet, and we use it all the time. However, trending is not unique to the internet. In fact, trending is how humans have always related to each other. This is how ideas grow, how movements get started, how programs are formed. Trending is when one person shares something with another person, and that person shares the same thing with another person, and pretty soon you have a momentum built in. We have trending going on right now in the scriptures with the Easter story being shared. It starts with the empty tomb, but soon enough Mary sees Jesus. And then Jesus appears to the disciples. And now we have Jesus appearing to these two who are on the road to Emmaus. And what's happening is that they're sharing more and more. And in fact, that's exactly what the season of Easter is about. This is that 50-day period between Easter and Pentecost when scripturally Jesus made a number of appearances to people before he ascended into heaven. And so the story is really beginning to spread. People are beginning to get on board with the idea. The disciples go back to say, hey, we saw Jesus. The disciples already there said, oh yeah, we saw him too. And now it's beginning to snowball. It's beginning to grow. There's a momentum. And this whole idea of resurrection, it's a kind of thing that's hard to believe, but people, despite their disbelief, are witnessing a risen Christ, and they are really getting excited about it. In fact, this is a trend that has continued not only for a day, not only for a season, not only for a generation, but for 2,000 years. The whole idea of a resurrected Jesus has been gaining momentum. I mean, most ideas on the internet, the trends last for about 5 or 6 days and then they're gone. There are groups that form that might last a generation. There are programs that might last a couple of generations. But everything seems to run out of steam after a while. I mean, the trending up is met by a trending down as well. Except for this resurrection thing. It is something that began long ago, and it continues to this very day, with each new generation being acquainted with the idea of a resurrected Jesus. I mean, so much so that the Christian population of the world is about 1/3 of the world's population. Isn't that amazing? 1/3 of the people of the world believe in a Jesus who was resurrected. And this is a staggering number of people. In fact, Christianity is the world's largest religion. Now, I could go on, and I will in a minute, to talk about Jesus sightings. But I have to also be respectful and honest at this point to say, as much of a trend as embracing the resurrection of Jesus is, how many people, almost 2 billion people, have embraced it in our modern world, one needs to be honest to say 1/3 embrace it. That means that 2/3 don't. That for all the people who believe deeply in a resurrected Jesus, there's at least a couple more who don't. And for good reason. If we're going to be honest, there's good reason. It is hard to believe. It is not part of our natural experience. We are not used to seeing anybody who has died coming back. we don't see them in a resurrected form. And in fact, probably many modern Christians simply have not seen Jesus in a resurrected form either, or at least not that they were aware of. Again, I'll get to that in a minute. But perhaps there are those who are watching this video now who are skeptical or doubtful about this. And I just need to say, I understand. I understand. Perhaps better than you might know. I understand that feeling. It is hard to believe. It is so counterintuitive. But remember, all those folks back then, too, had problems with it. And yet, they were able to embrace it. They were able to embrace it and to go with it. And to become part of that trend where people saw and believed and shared that with others. The key thing, I think, in all of this is, number one, believing that it's possible for Jesus to be raised. If you are totally convinced that this can't happen, well, then, of course, it's probably not going to be very evident to you. But if you do believe that God, who created all things, could certainly raise Jesus from the dead and have him appear to people, if you think that's possible, then to go with that and to say, if it is possible, then perhaps I might see the risen Christ. Is that possible? And the answer is yes. And this is where the trend, I believe, continues to build its momentum. It's when people begin to know that they've seen Jesus in some way or fashion, that they then become convinced that he lives, and that gives them the confidence to share what they've experienced with others, and that helps them to build their confidence, and then they begin to see Jesus in various places, and then you see how it works. We're part of a trend, even now, started way back on that Easter day, of learning to see the risen Christ when he appears. Now, again, these fellas had the advantage of seeing an actual Jesus in front of them, although he only lasted for a moment when he broke the bread and then he disappeared. But maybe that's how some of us today see the risen Christ. We see him often in that moment of the worship service when the bread is broken. This is my body broken for you. Do this, remembering me. Or when that wine is poured into the cup. This is the new covenant in my blood, which is shed for you for the remission of sins. Do so, remembering me. There's something powerful in that helps us to see and believe that Christ lives. For the effects of that broken body and that blood that is shed has an effect upon us that not only cleanses us, but it heals us and feeds us and gives us strength. We don't see Jesus literally, but we see him with the eyes of our heart. And that makes all the difference in the world. We may see Jesus in a healing we undergo. Many of us are wounded in some way, either physically or emotionally. And maybe we have experienced a miraculous kind of healing where we got better when we didn't think we ever would. And what a wonderful experience that is. And maybe not for ourselves, maybe somebody we know and love. But again, a healing can be a powerful demonstration of the love of God at work. Sometimes we see Christ in action. When somebody says something or does something that was totally unexpected, but totally Christ-like, and suddenly we realize that Jesus is in our midst. Let me give you an example. This is one that really spoke to me a few years ago. There were several of us from the church I formerly served. We went to Philadelphia to see some of the 1,001 worshiping communities. They were operating in that area. 1,001 worshiping communities was an effort by the Presbyterian Church over a decade to try new ways of spreading the word and attracting people around that word and helping new forms of church evolve. And the Philadelphia area had several of those projects going on. And one we went to was a homeless ministry. It was in an old Presbyterian church that had been decommissioned in terms of actual congregation. But the presbytery had the resource, but didn't know what to do with it until a minister came along and said, why don't we try a homeless feeding ministry and see if we can build something with that? So they did, and they did. We went to visit that, and it was a thriving homeless ministry that tended to the needs of several hundred homeless people in the area, not only food, but also with health care, with psychological counseling, with a post office. And then from that, the people involved began to grow into an actual worshiping community where they had worship services on Sunday nights. So we visited facilities, we visited the worship service, participated in it, and we also had a meal with the homeless people. Now, this is the part where I got a little nervous because I really hadn't dealt with homeless people in any numbers before. I had never really done that. And I didn't know what to expect, to be sitting at a table with homeless people. I mean, were they, you know, angry? Were they unpredictable? You know, I just didn't know. And I was a little nervous. I didn't know what it was going to be like. And so another person and I, together on the trip, came to the church to be led in a little bit early before the meal began because the staff were going to kind of orient us to how things are done. Well, we got to the front of the church, and there are all these homeless people out there waiting for the doors to open, the main doors, to come on in and be seated at the tables and get their meal. And they were simply standing out there, and so we got there and realized we didn't know what door to go into. We were a little confused. We thought the doors would be open at that point, but they weren't. And then a person said, a woman, are you trying to get into the church? And we said, yes. She read us perfectly. She said, well, the staff entrance is over there. We go through the main entrance here, but the staff entrance is over at the side. Maybe you want to go over there and knock on the door. I'm pretty sure they'll let you in. And so we went. And just as she said, we knocked on the door and they let us in. I had not expected that act of kindness, that little act of kindness from that homeless person. But she was cooperative, helpful, and caring. And right away, so much of my anxiety about eating with the homeless and associating disappeared. Because what she did was Christ-like. I saw Jesus in her face and I heard his words in my ears. That simple kindness drove away the dark that I had in my own heart. And by the way, the supper was fine. In fact, turns out that homeless people are just like anybody else. They're happy when they're eating. It was a great evening, and it's pretty good food too. Got to talk with several folks and just opened up doors that I did not know could be opened because I saw a bit of Jesus in that woman. This is how we see the Christ today. Sometimes people actually do have a vision of the resurrected Christ, but more often than not, it comes to those moments in worship, the breaking of bread, in a personal healing in which we have been improved in some way, or through a kindness that we just did not expect. These are the signals of the living Christ. Now, if you're a skeptic and don't believe in the risen Christ, chances are you won't link up these incidents with the presence of Jesus. But if you do entertain the possibility that God could raise somebody from the dead, once you entertain that, you begin to see the risen Christ like the disciples at Emmaus, or Simon or Mary. You begin to see Jesus in front of you and recognize it, and the heart burns, and you tell others, and they get excited. They begin to see Jesus, and you have a trend called the resurrection of Jesus, where people believe and embrace and celebrate the risen Lord. Thanks be to God. At this time, I encourage us to tune into our next hymn. It's a hymn that's put on by a quartet of young people in a Presbyterian church. And it's the hymn, Live into Hope. And I've included the words in the email. And they talk about ways in which we see and celebrate how the risen Christ liberates people and brings hope into their lives.